You know me, I'm always looking for ways to highlight the best and the worst in American cities. So today I've got the 10 US cities with the least amount of driving per capita, and it's coming up next. This is CityNerd, weekly content on cities and transportation. Viewer suggested topics, always welcome. And here's one that has, a bunch of stuff about Pittsburgh, and then I used US Census VMT data to make a list of urbanized areas with the lowest VMT, and it gave me some really interesting results. Pittsburgh did very well, smiley face. I think it would make a fun top 10 video for you. You know, I almost feel like I've created a monster by ranking Pittsburgh so highly in so many videos. But I did like the idea, except I'm not going to use Census VMT data because I've been using the census a lot lately, and I wanted to use a data source that I think can give us a different perspective and maybe some surprising answers. And I think that's a pretty accurate description of what I ended up with here. So what I landed on is actually very simple. Table HM72 from Federal Highways, which I have used in the past to analyze things like freeway lane miles in cities, aggregates travel statistics for every urbanized area in the US. Well, one of the fields is daily vehicle miles traveled per capita, which they get by extrapolating from count data and totaling up an estimate of all vehicle miles traveled within an urbanized area and then dividing it by the population of that urbanized area. Pretty simple, but important to note that this isn't just personal vehicles. It includes all the other motor vehicle travel in the region too, including freight and commercial vehicles, gig workers, and buses. Now, I'm not an expert on the methodology they use for calculating all these measures, but it is the FHWA, so I'm basically going to take it as gospel. I mean, it's the federal government. If they don't know what's going on in their system, who does? Anyway, let's go to the top line number here, which is completely outrageous. The average daily VMT per capita for all urbanized areas in the US is 25.5 miles. That's not per household. That's not even for people of driving age. That's 25.5 miles of driving for every human, period. And look, recognize that if you live car-free like I do, you don't really live car-free. In the sense that if you do things like buy random household items from Amazon or eat food or require the services of people who actually do drive, there's a sense in which you're just offloading the driving. So look, regardless of all this, what I expected this list to look like was just the usual suspects that have high mode share for things like transit, biking, and walking. And there is some of that, but it's more complicated. Because all driving is rolled into it, it's really what cities are most car dependent in a larger sense, including all the freight movement and transit and ride hails that allow the city to function. And remember, this is VMT, not mode share, so it's not just whether people drive, but how far do they go when they do. So one way of looking at daily VMT per capita is, it's kind of a sprawl index. When cities grow out instead of up, you have to go longer distances. This will all be a lot clearer when we get to the dishonorable mentions, so let's just get into it. Number 10 is Sacramento, California. So one thing I'm going to do as we go through this is, it is very difficult to pinpoint exactly why each of these cities has relatively low VMT per capita, but I'm going to give you my theory for each one. For Sacramento, I did very little professional planning work in California, so I'm not super familiar with it, but it is one of the few states that has land use laws and regulatory powers related to urban growth boundaries. Does Sacramento have suburban sprawl? Sure, but it has a lot of these areas where suburban development comes right up against agricultural land, so it keeps the metro area a bit more compact than it otherwise might be. Let's stay with this theme and go to number 9, San Jose, which you might think is essentially suburban in character. I mean, downtown San Jose does kind of look like downtown Bellevue, Washington. But again, California does just about as much to demarcate urban areas from forest and farmland as any other state does. So people might drive more than they should. I'm not going to tell you Santa Clara County is a transit-oriented wonderland, but those driving trips get contained in a smaller area. Number 8 is Chicago. Still one of the great industrial and freight hubs in the US. A lot of goods move in and out of the metro area, so there's a sense in which it's a little surprising it shows up on this list. In a way, just being at number 8 is a bit of a testament to the city's high transit mode share, its density, and the sheer number of great walkable neighborhoods it has. You really shouldn't need to drive much in a city like this. Number 7 is Providence, Rhode Island. I have to admit I'm kind of stumped on this one, but I've spent very little time talking about Providence on this channel, so let's just point out it's got some sneaky good urbanism if you ignore the hatchet job they did with the freeway system. You have these cool historic districts around Brown University, east of downtown, and even the suburbs tend to be older cities that don't really sprawl that much, so it's pretty walkable, and you're never gonna have to go that far within the metro area to get what you need. Okay, that's my Providence argument. Give me yours down in the comments. Number 6, it gives me no pleasure to report to you that Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania does in fact make this list. I don't really know what I'm going to tell you about Pittsburgh, I haven't already, but pretty much any measure you look at is going to tell you that for an urbanized area its size, Pittsburgh punches way above its weight in transit service and use and walkability and the amount of walking that actually occurs. Honestly, at this point, the less said the better. Number 5 is San Francisco, Oakland. Shouldn't be a surprise given what the mode split data is for this region and what I already told you about California land use law. One thing I want to emphasize here though, this is all about VMT that occurs within the urbanized area itself, so it doesn't really account for, say, super commuting, like people who live in Stockton or other completely different urbanized areas coming into the Bay Area. Still though, there is less driving per capita within this urbanized area than all but 4 others in the US. Number 4 is Portland, Oregon. Look, this one makes all kinds of sense. Another medium-sized metro that overperforms on transit, walking, and biking, but also even stronger legal framework around urban growth boundaries than California has. Statewide Goal 14 on urbanization aims to provide for an orderly and efficient transition from rural to urban land use to accommodate urban population and urban employment inside urban growth boundaries to ensure efficient use of land and to provide for livable communities. A lot of that means promoting walkability and travel options, but a lot of it is just promoting shorter trips by keeping urban forms more compact. Anyway, let me know if you want a deeper dive on UGBs because it is an aspect of planning I dealt with for a long time. Number 3 is Philadelphia. I joke that Philly is like East Coast Chicago, or maybe Chicago is Midwest Philly. I don't know. Similar deal though. Strong on transit for the US, walkable neighborhoods all over, and the suburban areas just don't sprawl the way some of our other medium and large metro areas do, which I am going to talk about in a minute. But it just comes back to the point that when everything is closer together, it just takes less infrastructure and less freight movement to distant locations to make everything work, which I think is a big part of what urbanism is all about. Okay, in a minute, I'm going to get to honorables and dishonorables and the top 2, one of which is eminently guessable, and the other one you're going to have to really think about. But first, quick reminder to drop a like on the video and subscribe if you're a fan of cities that just have less driving. Connect in all the usual ways if you care to, and consider supporting the channel directly by becoming a patron. Honorable mentions, I'm just going to give you the next 3, which in reverse order are Seattle and DC, which I think are not surprising. But number 11 is the Los Angeles urbanized area, which is a bit of a surprise given the city's reputation for car culture and the fact that it's home to the busiest port on the continent. But again, LA doesn't really sprawl the way some other cities do, especially given Riverside San Bernardino is considered a separate urbanized area. Speaking of sprawl, let's go to the worst city on this list, which it gives me no pleasure to tell you is the one I already told you is the sprawl capital of planet Earth a couple weeks ago. Almost 40 daily VMT per capita, just absolutely wild stuff. And second worst, just behind Charlotte, is the city I'm just gonna call extra large Charlotte. Okay, let's get back into it. Number 2 is New York, so let the suspense begin. I don't even know if I have to theorize why New York is high on this list. Best transit in the US by probably an order of magnitude. More dense, walkable neighborhoods than any other city on the continent, in my opinion. The lowest rates of car ownership, easily. There's still a lot of traffic, but on a per capita basis, not so much. But still, not the leading US metro area, over 1 million, when it comes to daily vehicle miles traveled per capita. Because the number 1 slot goes to San Juan, Puerto Rico, which shouldn't be a surprise if you really think about it. It's on an island that has a mountain range in the middle of it, so the urbanized area is compact by necessity. Like, if I'd lowered the population threshold, Honolulu would have been high on this list too. But also, Puerto Rico has its struggles. There's relatively high unemployment, lots of educated folks moving to the mainland, and so the economy is just kind of tough overall. Car ownership is on the low side, and if you aren't working, you don't have a lot of places to drive every day. That said, if you haven't been to San Juan, it is largely pretty walkable. The weather is spectacular, well, except for every few years when it's spectacularly awful. But it is a city I've really enjoyed visiting in the past and hope to get back to at some point. Okay, so if you watch this channel, it should be no surprise that travel is really important to me. It's done more to change the way I think about cities and transportation in the US than just anything else. And that's where today's sponsor, NordVPN, comes in. Back in late 2021, I only had a couple videos under my belt when I went to Mexico for 3 months. I had like 95 subscribers when I walked across the border to Tijuana. Then I did a video a week as I traveled around Mexico, and by the time I came back to the US 3 months later, I had like 12,000 subscribers and maybe a new purpose in life. I didn't really know what I was doing, and if we're being honest, I still don't. For example, I was not savvy at all to all the different issues I was gonna have just trying to connect to the internet and do basic research from a Mexican IP address. And not to mention trying to watch American sports and shows on streaming apps. Well, when I went to Spain and Portugal for 3 months earlier this year, I was not gonna make the same mistake. I mean, I don't know if you noticed, but I moved around a lot. I was using a variety of Wi-Fi connections in all kinds of short-term rentals and in bars and coffee shops. So I wanted that extra layer of confidence, which NordVPN gives you. I mean, I'm doing all kinds of stuff in my creator account. I'm paying bills from overseas. I had to file my taxes while I was in Portugal. So I really want the security a great VPN gives you. So I realize this is a rare thing for this channel, but I am strongly recommending NordVPN because it really did save the day so many times while I was overseas creating content this year. And if you sign up for any of NordVPN's 2-year plans, they're gonna give you a free month, but if you sign up using my special code down in the description, they're gonna give you a bonus month. One other thing, there are actually times when you might want to use an IP address from a foreign country. Like, if you're booking hotels or car rentals, a lot of websites will show you a higher price if you're originating from a United States IP address. Just a little trip planning hack. Anyway, NordVPN does give you a 30-day money-back guarantee, so this really is a pretty straightforward proposition. Again, use the code down in the description. It does get you a better deal, and it really does help support the channel. Thanks again. And that is all I got. Thanks for joining today, and thanks as always to the patrons for supporting me as I settle into this somewhat affordable, semi-permanent base camp. My quote-unquote studio is a work in progress, but it's coming together. Keep the great topic suggestions coming. I'll be back with a new episode next week, and I'll see you then.